is within our grasp. We have demonstrated the ability to resolve injustice in the past, but regarding common sense gun legislation, we have failed. The turning point of the Second Amendment's definition happened in the Supreme Court. In only 6 instances, the court has ruled directly on the Second Amendment. The first in United States v. Cruikshank, in which Chief Justice Morrison Waite declared that this is one of the amendments that has no other effect than to restrict the powers of the national government. The second in Presser v. Illinois, the court declared that this is one of the amendments that has the court declared that Presser and others did not have the right to organize as a self-proclaimed military organization to protest state law because that is not an attribute of national citizenship. Military organization and military drill parade are especially under the control of the governments of every country. They cannot be claimed as a right independent of law, meaning militias are to be defined by the governments they exist under. Illinois, at this time, had an 8,000-member National Guard. All other rulings on this were in accordance with the previous cases until 2008. In the 2008 court case, D.C. v. Heller, Justice Scalia declared that the Second Amendment now protects the individual citizen's right to own and use handguns for self-protection in their homes. Along with that, the court made clear that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were allowable, as well as restrictions on dangerous and unusual weapons, laws regulating the storage of firearms to prevent accidents, and weapons that are most useful in military service, M16 rifles and the like, may be banned. The way in which we interpret the Second Amendment heavily contributes to the gun debate and has been misconstrued, largely by the NRA, and used to perpetrate propaganda. Research from Johns Hopkins, Pew Research, the CDC, and more are in agreement that there is a problem with disproportionate gun death statistics in America. April 16, 2007, the college campus of Virginia Tech was rocked to its core when it experienced the worst gun massacre in 21st century American history. The shooter had purchased 2 semi-automatic handguns legally from local stores. He had large capacity magazines, those holding over 30 bullets, which were previously illegal after the assault weapons ban of 1994, but the bill lapsed in 2004. He had a history of mental illness, irrational and emotional behaviors, and a series of incidents that should have prevented him from ever owning a firearm. In 2005, he was declared by a judge to be mentally ill and a danger to himself, but he was never institutionalized, therefore never being put on any sort of state list preventing him from gun ownership. April 16, 2007, Song Hee Cho fired 200 bullets in 10 minutes, killing 32 people. July 20, 2012, an abominable evil struck the nation and changed America forever. That evil was in Aurora, Colorado, at a movie theater showing the latest Batman movie. The shooter entered the theater, murdered 12, and injured 58 others. The 24-year-old James Holmes had legally purchased 4 guns, an AR-15 semi-automatic assault rifle with a 100-round drum magazine, 2 40 caliber Glocks, each with large capacity magazines, and a Remington 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. Holmes had also purchased over 6,000 rounds of ammunition anonymously online. Unsurprisingly, this shooter too had suffered a psychotic break, which should have led to his exemption from gun ownership. In the words of Jason Crow, a Colorado congressman who has served overseas in 3 combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, I believe in the right of self-defense, but you don't need an assault weapon or 1,000 rounds of armor-piercing bullets to do that. In the words of political scientist Samuel Huntington, men may, of course, have order without liberty, but they cannot have liberty without order. It is certainly agreed that the American government must force certain laws for the benefit of society, such as taxes, truancy laws, and more. What then makes firearm usage and regulation such a cause for dispute? Well, it is indisputable that the purpose of a firearm is the destruction of objects, animals, and people. Suggesting the complete removal of all guns in America would not be an adequate solution. However, decreasing their overwhelming presence and easy availability would greatly reduce their deadly effect. January 8, 2011, a 22-year-old man with a known history of mental illness shot Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords in the head from 3 feet away. After shooting Giffords, the man proceeded to use his 33-round magazine to spray the crowd, killing 6 and injuring 13 others. Armed bystanders moved to help, but were hesitant to react and be confused for another gunman. In the end, 3 unarmed bystanders were able to take down the man as he was switching out his magazines. Giffords miraculously recovered, and in 2013, her husband, former astronaut and military man Mark Kelly, testified before Congress that if the shooter had been limited to just 10 rounds, lives could have been spared, including that of a 9-year-old girl killed at the scene with the 13th bullet he fired. Even after this, there was no reaction or response to the loss of life through safety laws. There was nothing. These, and many more are the reasons to support common sense gun reform. We now live in a world where car fatalities and cancer are not the leading causes of death in American children. The number of children and teens killed by gunfire has increased 50% between 2019 and 2021. Ethically, our leaders have an obligation to the people, and something must be done to prevent these rising fatality statistics among children and teens. More laws regarding flagging mental illness and gun access, age minimums for gun buyers, and limiting large capacity magazines to those that only offer 10 rounds when purchasing would greatly increase the safety of children and teens in America. The terminology of gun rights, gun reform, and gun control are phrases that invoke strong political leanings, one side opposed to the other. However, differences aside, we can all agree that the shooters involved in Nashville, Aurora, Virginia Tech were all people that never should have been in possession of a firearm. The way in which we operate under the Second Amendment has been determined by a diverse plethora of factors. The National Rifle Association is one. Established in 1871 to promote and encourage shooting on a scientific basis, the NRA was an organization that focused on shooting for sport, hunting, and gun safety. Today, they are one of Washington's biggest political lobbies and donate millions of campaign dollars per year to the politicians they would like to see in office. The National Rifle Association has been silent after all mass shootings, except for the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, in which 154 shots were fired in under 3 minutes and 26 people, 20 of those children ages 5 to 10, were murdered. The NRA's response was not to comfort the families of the victims or validate the nation. Instead, CEO Wayne LaPierre said these words: "The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun." At a time when justice was obvious and critical and common sense was in favor of the victims, we were instead met with abusive politics and fear-mongering. Justice is and always should continue to be an American truth and not just an American dream. Justice for victims of gun violence is long overdue. In the wake of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, teamed up with Republican Senator Pat Toomey on a piece of legislation which came to be known as the Manchin-Toomey Amendment. The amendment enforced stricter background checks for private arms dealers as well as federally licensed arms dealers. The only exception to this would be gun sales between family and friends, under the condition that the sale was not advertised online or in a publication. The proposed amendment even went so far as to outlaw a national gun registry again, as it is already illegal. When asked about this, Republican Senator Pat Toomey said, "I don't consider criminal background checks to be gun control. I just think it's common sense." Then came our failure to react and our failure to enforce justice. Even though the bill received a majority vote of 55, it needed 65 to break the filibuster, never making it through the Senate. Families of murdered children watched on as their country failed them. 91% of Americans backed this bill, but because of closed minds and the greed of a powerful gun lobby, it failed. Passing and enforcing preventative legislation would help to minimize these tragedies and maybe even stop them before they start. To argue that maybe if a teacher would have been armed, lives could have been spared is like trying to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Instead, our reaction must be to look towards the future and see how we can patch the holes in our laws that are allowing heinous acts to slip through the cracks, undetected until it's too late. ensuing investigation into the ATF and its practices showed that in the fiscal year of 2019, when Hunter Biden purchased his gun, the federal prosecutors received 478 referrals relying on the form and filed just 298 cases. That is out of approximately 27 million background checks undertaken in a 12-month period. Perhaps then the answer is not a call for more gun laws, but for there to be actual enforcement of the laws that we do have. From 1972 to 2005, the ATF averaged fewer than 20 license revocations per to persuade Congress to deny the ATF $4.2 million appropriated to it for the program. Over time, the ATF was able to improve its reputation, but tread carefully where guns were concerned. The ATF does not possess the adequate budget or resources to do its job. In 1990, it only inspected about 2% of all gun dealers. The ATF is still barred by law from computerizing its records, so background checks are done slowly and laboriously by hand. A routine gun tracing takes about 5 days, a task that would take a computer seconds. This encourages shady gun dealings and trafficking. From 2007 to early 2010, of 31,000 guns seized by the Mexican government, 80% came from the United States. The tradition of owning and using guns for hunting and sports in America should be encouraged and continued. I come from a family of great hunters. Using and being around firearms is not unfamiliar to me. Schools are relatively safe places, and after these tragedies have responded by tightening security and focusing on safety. In the event of tragedies, we often react. After a high rate of automobile accidents and deaths, it became the law to wear a seatbelt. After the tragedy of 9/11, airports responded by tightening security and being much more thorough. After the civil rights movement, our government responded by offering everyone, no matter their skin color, equal protection under the law and protection from discrimination. Why then has our nation not reacted accordingly in the face of the gun issue? In conclusion, based on the facts stated in this argument, the founding fathers would have agreed with common sense gun legislation. My argument is not that guns are bad or that we shouldn't own them, but that it is crucial for us to recognize the fact that our systems and processes are damaged and need reform. The Second Amendment has been misapplied to the individuals instead of it being used to limit the powers of big government. We must equip ourselves with a knowledge of the past and a broad, open perspective of the future. We cannot change what we do not acknowledge, and by acknowledging the many gun-related faults in our system, we can move towards a better one. Thank you. I'd now like to open the floor for questions. Alex?
Yeah, I was just curious, do you think that gun legislation, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying, do you think gun legislation would create more scenarios where there's more, say, illegal arms dealers and unsafe scenarios like that? And along with that, do you know, so like sex trafficking is number 1 ranked in America. Do you know what the rank would be for arms dealing in America or the nation?
I didn't come across that statistic in my research, but going back to your previous question about illegal trafficking, I do think that if the ATF is doing its job, then and inspecting actual gun dealers, because those are the people that have access to large quantities of firearms. So if they are actually doing their job and inspecting all gun dealers and not just that 2%, then it would decrease the number of trafficking that we see in the United States. Mr. Klein.
First off, what made you decide to play it safe and pick such a non? I just picked a topic that I just didn't, it wasn't personal to me. This is not a topic that I am like gonna die over, you know? And so I felt like it would help me in my presentation not to get too emotionally attached and try to convince people because sometimes I get a little emotional when I try to persuade, and so I picked a topic that it wasn't too personal to me. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to present facts that I found they resonated with me, and this was important to me. And so my mom was actually showing me some of these statistics this summer, and I was like, wow, maybe this should be my thesis topic because I feel like this is interesting and important. But yeah, that's why I chose it.
Let me ask you one more thing, a question for you. Is there room in your scenario of common sense gun laws for a truly federal system of government in which the states retain a significant degree of autonomy?
I do think that is a possibility, but in our society, there's never really been a middle ground. There's always gonna be it's either all federal control or there's no control. And so I think that maintaining that balance would be very difficult. I do believe that there is a possibility for that, especially because of the ATF. I do think that that is an important part of our gun laws today. And because they are prevented from doing their jobs, the states sometimes overcompensate or undercompensate because of whatever region or wherever they are. So I do think that it's possible, but not likely.
Yes. So you talked about some of the prior Supreme Court precedent on the issue, and I think a lot of those cases were based on understanding of original intent. I think Scalia is a bit of a textualist in DC v. Heller. If you look, though, at the legislative history of the passage of the Second Amendment, which was included in the Constitution being ratified in response to Articles of Confederation. So the Constitution was ratified explicitly to increase the powers of the general, national, federal government. The Bill of Rights were intentionally included to limit the power of that government. So in light of that, do you think that, honestly, would amending the Constitution be the best route for your proposal? I mean, to enact these sort of regulations?
I don't think that amending the Constitution would solve this, but I do think that regarding the gun laws that we have in the scope that the Second Amendment was actually made for would actually help solve a lot of these issues because I do feel that the Second Amendment has been misapplied to back all these random gun laws that don't actually fall under the category of the Second Amendment. Like you were saying, it's meant to limit the powers of the national government. And so while the propaganda that surrounds the Second Amendment, it's our right. It really isn't. It's not. It's to limit the powers of the national government. So that answers. Grace.
Okay, so great presentation, by the way. You talk about how, why haven't we responded to the violence that we see? So it's a symptomatic response. How does your proposal of common sense gun laws differ from the government limiting what we can buy in terms of food? Because, in 2021, 700,000 people died of heart disease. But we know symptomatically heart disease can be caused by poor diet and whatnot. So how does common sense gun laws differ from something like the government controlling what we purchase in terms of food, like healthy food?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I would say is it differs on just the substance itself. So because food is something consumable, it's not intended maliciously, but the way that people use it could be malicious. The way that they overabundance or under eating is all bad for you. So, but the purpose of a firearm is the destruction of objects, animals, and people, like I said in my paper. So because of the seriousness and the gravity of, because I feel like guns have been taken a very light manner, especially because there's a lot of turmoil over the laws that surround them. And so if we take our gun laws more seriously because it is serious. Guns are serious. And so that would make it different. That's what makes it different.
First of all, I think you did a wonderful job, and I commend you on choosing a topic that's been historically different. But my question is, looking at larger cities like Chicago that have extremely strict gun control laws and tend to also see extremely high rates of gun violence, do you see that as a need for more laws or to actually enact what is already in place?
So the interesting thing about Chicago is that the city itself, it does have very strict gun regulation and very strict gun laws. But outside of the city, you can drive, basically it'd be like me driving to Bossier, and I can purchase a gun from a dealer from a gun show and have no sort of, I don't need to show any license, I don't need to fill out a form. And so because they're in such close proximity to places that don't have such strict regulation and they show low rates of crime, it's just basically like the laws that they're enacting are just being circumnavigated because they can just go out of the city and buy another firearm just as easily. And so that is a problem because of where they are in location.
So, living in Illinois, actually, we had our firearm, even outside of Chicago, we had to apply, get a card to own a firearm in rural areas. So, even outside Chicago, it is fairly strict and still has, like, the cities themselves, like, policy accurate and tends to have a higher crime rate. So, do you think that still applies? Like, if that those small cities still have a higher crime rate than most of Louisiana that has rules on guns?
I would say it's still applicable. Jackson?
How do you respond to the new Louisiana law that people 18 and above can conceal carry without any sort of training? Like, so I can, whenever I turn 18, I can get a rifle. I can just conceal carry wherever. How do you respond to that?
Because of what I've researched, I would say that lacks common sense. I mean, we can't even buy alcohol, so why are we able to buy a gun that could actually damage someone's human life or property? So yeah, I would say that lacks common sense.
So I want your opinion, just because you did a lot of research and everything. So do you feel like if there were more guns in places like a school or a movie theater, some armed guard at all the entrances and exits, do you think that anybody with mental health